walking on a tightrope, artistically. When you fall off, you can either fall off and hit the ground, or you can just kind of gracefully land. And there's a lot of cool stuff. What happens when you just try and work with stuff that isn't working out? I think I'm finding.
Hey, how's it going? You are here for Heavy Art Talk, and as usual, it's your host, Lee. Today, I am excited. I have somebody who has been doing a lot of really awesome work in comics. So not your typical Heavy Art Talk guest, but I imagine a lot of the people who like this show really are fond of his work as well. But I have Nick Pyle joining me today. He released the FEND comic through Death Wish, I believe a couple years back. He's currently working on one called Son of Man, and he also has another one called Carrier Bag, which is more of like a grayscale and a slightly different style. Anyways, very excited to talk with him. Nick, how's it going, man?
Hello, Lee. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good.
Cool.
So just kind of kicking things off, what have you been listening to lately?
Lately, it's definitely been a lot of Steve Albini stuff, for sure. We've been living in the post Albini world, and I've been figuring out where to go from there. You know what I mean? So going back in time and listening to all his old stuff, and even appreciating his fine. I'm sure he wouldn't call it his creative addition to other bands, but his beautiful ear. You know what I mean? And going back and appreciating that stuff. So lots of shellac, and definitely this Italian band. I think probably my favorite Steve Albini recording is this Italian band called Uzeta. You ever heard of them?
I haven't.
They are very, how do I put it? They're just kind of an unrelenting post-punk band. They're heavy, but they're also very skronky. But the drummer especially, they just pummel away at your head. And Albini captured that sound so well, and I find myself just like living in that world, that weird Italian post-punk world since then.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah,
I like that. I watched a interview of his just the other day. It was one through Banger TV. They do a lot of heavy metal stuff, but they had a completely unedited, like, hour-long interview. And I always find, whenever I listen to Steve Albini talk, I find that he has like a unique take on things, but a lot of it comes back to really truly representing the artists as best as they can. And he's a very humble person, especially towards the end of his life. And I really admire that.
I agree too. The changes he went through towards the end, and the mea culpas he came to after his, probably, as he admitted, his kind of problematic opinions and the different things he said in the 80s and 90s. He came back, and I think, some people say the best form of an apology is a changed behavior. And I think he really changed his behavior. And, it's really sad that he left so early. But at least at the end there, people got to know where he stood, and he came out. And it's very, very good. It's sad, but also it's one of those bittersweet, mostly bitter things.
Yeah. He leaves behind a good legacy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Do you listen to music pretty much all across the map? Like, or do you kind of go through like big phases of like, oh, I'm really into like this particular sound at any point? Like, how does that look for you in terms of your, passion for music?
I do I like pick and choose things on YouTube. Occasionally I'll do full albums, or, Spotify and all the other ones, or my record player. But I've been enjoying I found my old MP3 player from like 5 years ago. It still worked, and it had 2 SD slots in it, so it's got a lot of stuff on there. And I've been doing shuffle, really unhinged kind of shuffling between things, and enjoying that. I've been doing that while I draw as well too. It's a much different thing. So it's really heavy stuff, really noisy stuff, and then like the most sad sack singer-songwriter type stuff you could you get in there. But it does. It's this the MP3 player is more of like a snapshot of me from a few years ago. So I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm approaching music a little differently. It's more of, I'm not intensely listening to it. It's flowed more to the background, and I just let it inform what I'm doing while I'm working.
Totally. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I guess thinking about art and comics, I guess when you were like a child and stuff, do you recall what kind of captured your interest and really got you like set on this track as a kid?
Yeah, I was like about 12 or 13 when a comic book store opened right around the corner from my place, right at this perfect age, at a perfect time. If you're familiar with like the Image Comics boom after.
Oh yeah, the kind of early 90s or so.
Yeah, a group of artists left Marvel and DC and started their own, and it was it was very edgy and almost like a more purified version of more Marvel and DC. It was a little bit dumber, but it was a lot more violent and more exciting, flashy. It was the early days of computer coloring, so it was like eye-popping, usually pretty garish, weird computer coloring that I really got attached to very quickly, almost instantly. I used to read comic strips and usual things like that kids have access to, but once I got access to that, plus I had a paper route and I was working at an ice cream store, it was a perfect storm for me to get into that kind of thing, and I went hard. Yeah.
What's cool too about that time is, they're like the spinner racks and like grocery stores and stuff. Like buying comics wasn't just in a comic shop, it was kind of everywhere. And I was born in 91, so a lot of those experiences I didn't really have to the same degree. But listening about them now and like listening to interviews like Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane and stuff, it's interesting thinking about those times.
It was a magical time, that's for sure. I'm not sure how much you really missed. You came into your own. I'm sure you were, I don't know when you got into comics, at what age you kind of entered into. Do you remember?
I mean, it's pretty casual interest at a young age. And I got into 70s stuff a lot of the Spider-Man, like the Romita kind of stuff. And it was because I was basically reading my dad's comics. Like I found a whole slew of them. So, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, stuff like that. I definitely gravitated towards Marvel, but I wasn't keeping current. I was only looking at stuff from the 70s. And in terms of really, really appreciating comics, that's a relatively recent phenomenon for me, but it's been fun diving in.
Do you find that your aesthetic still kind of, you kind of prefer that 70s kind of like flat colors and the low quality paper, or do you prefer?
I do like that paper, but in terms of the look, I'm down for like a lot of different styles. I think right now I'm really into Bill Sienkiewicz kind of style stuff. That's just kind of a little off the wall and experimental. That's what's been kind of catching my eye lately.
We love Bill, an absolute the cornerstone of when I first realized, I think like the first time I saw a comic that was clearly painted, with like all the mixed media stuff that he used, the airbrush and things like that. I had absolutely no idea how you could even do that. I mean, obviously, you could print full color images like that in regular books, but I was like, in a comic, it's absolutely crazy to think about that kind of thing. That kind of immediate line work that is so detailed and filled with grit, and little specks of things like that. Just an amazing guy. I love that guy so much. He was like one of the few guys that I probably, I've gotten only a couple of books signed at a Comic-Con. I got stuff signed by him and I was just like, hello, and signed, thank you. I couldn't even engage with him, even though I've heard he's such a nice guy.
I know. Yeah, he seems like one of the nicest, like watching like interviews and stuff. He's got a good sense of humor too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to meet him one day, but I think I'd be a similar kind of thing because he's quickly become a really big influence. Because I think, you're similar in the fact that like your work is mixed media. I mean, you're doing marker, you're doing the Poscas. Like, I like the fact that with mixed media, you can kind of be like, here's the pros of this tool and the cons of it, and you try to like mitigate that as you explore. Is that kind of how it is for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are they're difficult to control sometimes. There's lots of different factors that can make mixed media things not play together, like literally oil-based, water-based,
Yeah.
Humidity, like your markers things act funny when it's humid out. There's all kinds of things. And I think that leaning into that for me is what I like. And you can see sometimes if you look closely at any kind of art, but also comic art, but I mean, anywhere, you can see that if you don't read the comic as intended, which is pretty quickly, you can zone in on one part and you can see like, this has been overworked heavily. I can see that he tried to fix this, you can kind of see that. And I find that charming as hell. And there's an honesty to it that I really like. When you're walking on a tightrope, creative, artistically, when you fall off, you can either fall off and hit the ground, or you can just kind of gracefully land. And there's a lot of cool stuff what happens when you just try and work with stuff that isn't working out. I think I'm finding. Totally.
It kind of reminds me of like a lot of those like artist editions that are coming out where you see the raw page and like all the whiteout and corrections and stuff. It's reassuring in a way, because once an artist has been around for so long, they have a legacy, they almost become like a mythological creature, and it kind of like humbles them and brings them back to being human. And it's nice. It's relatable.
Absolutely. It's actually the next book, the one I'm working on now. I've already kind of decided to. I didn't really hide anything in the old book. I was careful about. There were some things that I just needed to fix. It's not nothing, no two ways about it. But I really kept my computer off of that first book. For some reason, this time I'm going to refer in some way to those artist editions, and show people that, or to whoever wants to look for that kind of thing, that it will be there. Like, you can clearly see that I whited out a big part of this and drew on top of it. And I want to kind of figure that into this one a bit more somehow, because I think it's a good thing for people to know. And, maybe it just takes some of the pressure off of me to be perfect. I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of times artists just have the perfectionist tendency for ourselves, but when it comes to seeing work in others, I mean, it's like we're both, artists, and we appreciate and we look for that. You're almost looking for those flaws to keep it human. So, I don't know. I think that's a cool idea, and I imagine most people would be really open to it. A lot of it's just our own mentality to whether we allow it and put it out there.
Yeah,
be vulnerable.
I can see myself wanting to. Yeah, I think vulnerability is actually that's exactly the angle I would want it to be. I would like to be. I want to. What is it? What is the term? I had it like kind of figured out in my head before, but there is no. Perfectionism is a dead end, and hiding the fact that you are occasionally imperfect kind of like continues that tradition, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be making millions and millions of copies of these books, but to the few people who see it, I think they'll appreciate the fact that it's, all on paper, and I have, there's not blood, there's probably some tears, but certainly I've got a sweating problem. Things I've had to work on something that's literally happened. I've sweat on something and then had to fix the sweat stain. It's nothing but true.
Oh man. Yeah, I've never dealt with that. What's the color of the sweat stain?
The sweat stain, when it lands on a fresh alcohol marker, it creates like a white spot in a complete. It like the saltiness of it. I think it's like a science experiment on there. It's hitting alcohol, and I'm kind of a salinated guy, but I wear a headband now or a baseball cap.
Oh, nice. Good control measure.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I was curious about. I've been really interested in comics, and with that, kind of the business of comics, and it seems like there's so many different paths in this career, and you've gone kind of more of the, I don't know if would you call it like independent kind of route. I mean, you're, creator owned, type of thing. And, there's so many other types of career paths that are different. Like, being a penciler at Marvel or an inker or whatever. Like, I guess what's your kind of take on the comics industry right now and maybe all the different avenues and kind of how spiderwebby it can be?
Yeah, there are lots of different, ways you can put things out now. Obviously, a lot more than in the golden and silver age. There's way more than even 10 or 20 years ago, for sure.
Yeah.
The way I was able to put this comic out was pretty lucky. I just got contacted out of the blue by Jake Bannon from Converge, who owns Death Wish, which is their distribution arm. They also do all the merch, all these band merches, all the botch t-shirts, all the, what else do they do?
They do records. I mean, art prints, tons of stuff.
And I'd noted they asked me they first contacted me about doing merch and things of that nature. And I jumped on. I was like, absolutely. I do not want to pack and ship anything. I just want to make stuff and put it out. And they were just like, yeah, it's a great, they have a great split. And they did that. And then after a while, when I decided to do a comic and I talked about it online, I didn't go straight to them. They just contacted me and said, would you like us to put it out? They do the occasional, they do Jake Bannon's actual art books. He's a great artist as well.
Oh yeah.
And they also do his, like collections of hardcore photography books or other photographer. I think it'd be Glenn Friedman's book, maybe. So like nice quality hardcover art books, essentially. And then it didn't really even occur to me to ask them, but it's a great. They put out really nice quality stuff. It's printed in Canada. They have a great printer, and it's almost a prestige format for a comic book. Like you would never think of someone's first comic is coming out in this like kind of deluxe hardcover format.
Oh yeah.
So when it came out, a lot of people were like, "This is a little extra for just your first comic out from a pretty big." Relatively big, indie big record company, and I was unsure how it would go or even how it would look too. Jake actually did all the book pre-production stuff too, and he showed me what he was doing. I was like, this looks good, but with mixed media, you're never really quite sure how it's going to come out print wise too. You have to scan it in kind of weird ways because a lot of times the colors, as I'm sure as you know, can come out just looking way
literally dealing with that this week.
Oh, were you? Yeah. That's a thing that's never going to go away, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just always going to throw curveballs. So I was like really unsure because I didn't really get, I don't think I got a galley copy. I think maybe I just got an unprinted copy to see what the book would feel like. So I was really sure. So when it came out, I was so beyond overjoyed with how crisp and clear the production was. It didn't have any squonky weirdness. It felt like heavy and lofty and so on. And I was like, this is not what people normally put out for their first comic. So I was a little unsure how I would, tell people about it, but I didn't need to worry about that because it just looked great and people wanted it. And it was because those guys they're almost like a functioning book publisher in a weird way.
Yeah, I'm amazed at what that company does because they work with a lot of great artists. I mean, everyone who's worked with Jacobs has good things to say. And then on top of that, I mean, he's creating his own work and Converge, they are very active, I think. They're still releasing albums every couple years. So I really admire his work ethic just as a person.
I am absolutely admiring, and for him to be like a nice, thoughtful guy on top of all of that too, I'm pretty sure it's rarer than we would all like to admit. To have such a nice, normal guy, but also be like this kind of famous, really cool guy in like 3 awesome bands, and one of those bands is like a legendary band.
That's a good point. Yeah, he's beyond just one band. Yeah, and he just released something this year I was listening to. shit though. I forget the name of the band. Umbra Vitae.
Umbra Vitae, yeah, that's it.
With the white cover. It was really cool looking.
It's very cool. He's just going and going.
Totally. So I recall from your blog, you'd been drawing, creating some work, and you got in on Instagram very early, like 2012, and started, getting a following from there. But there's, a lot of years of just creating like these independent characters in this kind of sci-fi realm before, committing to making a comic. So I guess can you kind of tell a little bit of that story of just from like the Instagram years to getting to FEND? Maybe so like 2012, kind of where you were at.
Sure. The Instagram years getting to FEND. It really just started. Before FEND and before even I was doing any kind of this kind of futuristic sci-fi, whatever you want to call it, an approach or an aesthetic.
Yeah.
It was just I was just trying to be a regular cartoonist. I was working on a single panel cartoon called The Beander Man, kind of like a cute little cartoon about death. It's kind of I should have sent you a pic, but I'll show it to you sometime. It's like just like a dark, funny single panel cartoon. And in the middle, I was just posting on Instagram just things from my sketchbook. That was not. I was working like that was the thing I was actually woodshedding, trying to get good at this cartooning thing. Mm-hmm. And I did a few drawings while watching a science fiction movie, and I did a couple kind of like science fiction themed cartoons for some reason, just completely just like I had the right colors to make a laser look cool. I'd never done anything like that at all. And it pleased me so much that I pretty much just switched over to doing nothing but science fiction things. I kind of just always follow my nose, what I'm really enjoying. And I was like, man, drawing those like kind of paneled futuristic rooms with like a little guy with a gun running around. It feels like I could make like something. This is looks like a comic, but it's also could be something else. And it really blew up into the next, whatever it was, 10 years of my life of exclusively doing that, but kind of like just carving away at an aesthetic that is a combination of all of our favorite 70s and 80s science fiction movies and 80s action movies, things like that. But tonally, I wanted them to be kind of sad and dark, but also look futuristic and cool. And I just tinkered with it for a long time. I don't know when exactly I started just doing those full body shots of guys, but that definitely came after I got a book I found a book at the used bookstore about character design, and it was about like how to do it, but it was just mostly what got to me was like these cool kind of poses. You just draw a guy or whoever, and their arms are crossed or they're going like this, and you just draw the shit out of it, and you draw all kinds of little buttons and things, and you can spend hours on it and make it really like rich with detail. And then I just started doing those guys that those kind of posing guys, almost like action figures.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what I was doing. I was like, I like concept art. I like looking at my old, Ralph McQuarrie Star Wars books, and you just see him drawing all kinds of different characters. And like, I really like figuring out what you can learn from a character just by looking at them became an important part of what I was doing. And as that progressed, doing it over and over again, I started drawing the same character over and over again and refining that character. And I just got in the habit of drawing someone drawing them from the left. What do they look like? What does their back look like? What do their boots look like? And it just kept getting bigger and bigger until I was really creating what I thought was a pretty memorable and noticeable character that for some reason was so heavily detailed that it just read differently than anything else that I was seeing. It was just kind of crazy and like, who is this? And why are they so fucked up looking? And aren't they so angry? That looks uncomfortable. As that progressed too, I kind of at some point, I don't know how, because I wasn't even really, I had read comics as a kid all the way through my 20s. And then I started playing music for my 20s until my late 30s. And during that time, I really wasn't really keeping too much up on comics. Just a little bit here and there. But as that era where my playing music era was kind of crapping out, comics crept back in. And then once I was like reading things, and I found a few key books, and I was like, I think this is probably a comic character. It was almost like it was not a conscious thing. I was like, this could be a very cool looking comic book character. And then as I started reading comics more heavily and with more intent during that period, I learned that like, comics are actually really fucking their own thing, and they're pretty hard to make. And it was kind of the perfect thing for me to dig into, which is a thing I do like to do. I kind of like to not really obsess, but I like to get deep on the thing that I like. If it's not I'm fairly certain you're the same way. You don't just like a band; you want to learn everything about them. What was it like making your favorite record?
Yeah,
that kind of deep thing. So I always go that way. So it feels like I got to comics very naturally. It was not my intent with those robot guys, but once I got there, I was like, this is what they should do. These guys should like run around and punch big holes in things. I think I could probably make that happen.
Totally. Do you recall a couple of those comics that allowed you that realization that, you could also pursue this with these sci-fi-esque characters?
There's one, I don't know how easy it is to find, but it's one of my favorites of all time. It's by this book by this artist named Samuel Hiti, Hiti, and it's called Death Day. It's a black and white comic. He did it in the early 2000s. He used to do like kind of like interesting Western comics, and he's an American guy, but he almost has a European style. But he did this one science fiction comic called Death Day that is one of the most unhinged, upsetting, and cool, but also cartoony and lots of different words. this guy, I recommend it to anybody who is interested in a comic that does not talk down to you and kind of makes you fill in a lot of the blanks, which I think is like the fun part of a story. A lot of times is putting your own. The author leaves things open for you to squeeze into, and seeing that book after that is when I kicked into high gear, because he's kind of loose, but he's also very detailed. He clearly can draw quickly, and he can draw a lot, like a one panel with many figures in it or a big piece of architecture. He's not too concerned with rulers or what's the word? Looking at things from up and down angles, what's that word?
Like all the different perspectives and stuff?
Perspectives. He's good at that, but it's more like a vibe he puts out there. And once I saw that you could do that because I'm not a ruler guy, I'm not a perspective person. My perspective, I'm always just kind of fudging it and making it up. And if it looks right, that's fine. Yeah. But I love artists who do perfect perspective. I think it's incredible. But once I saw Sam Hiti unconcerned with that, I was like, then I don't really think I need to be concerned with that. And I think that's one less roadblock that I need to worry about, because I think a lot of artists or people who want to make comics are like, I can't do that. I can't. I won't be able to. I don't know how it's like a kind of arcane skill that only certain artists have, but you don't really need any of that stuff to tell a compelling story. So I think Death Day was when I was the one kind of a thing that unlocked that feeling for me, for sure.
That's a really good observation too, of just like seeing somebody do something that makes you realize that you can also, in your own way, do a similar thing. Like, and I mean very clearly not copying, more of like, oh, you're taking in this direction and you got away with this. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I also can do that. And you see so many great artists out there, and you can admire a lot of artists' work, but when they really like hit you and they like make you realize something, it's something special. I think that's kind of what Sienkiewicz has been like for me lately, of just like that, you can like put all these weird layers and use gesso and stuff. And it's like, man, I was kind of tight before, and maybe eventually I'll loosen up a little bit more. So I don't know. I can relate.
Powerful observations as we all go along too.
Absolutely.
A big part of it also, like just seeking out books and artists too, is another big
Oh,
way
it's
to
fun.
get all that stuff.
You also were talking about like looking at these characters from different angles and different poses and stuff. And I was reading in your blog that like, have you done any of the like maquette work to like kind of like study a character and be able to draw like faces from different angles? Like, did you do that for FEND at all?
I didn't do it for FEND, but I'm going to do it for Son of Man. I've actually, it's in my sunroom, but I have made the main character is kind of like a Jesus robot. So I have made he's got a weird shaped head, and I've always been like, how do people, when you get like that 3/4 turn, like all these different angles are down here. I want to start moving my camera around more, see what things look like from above. I kind of get stuck kind of head on sometimes, which is, it's the clearest way to tell a story, but also I want to feel comfortable, like having a world in my head that feels real, and to me that makes me think that like these people should look the same every time as a bottom layer, but also like they should look right, and the maquette heads is a thing. I'm right now I'm doing it mostly in my sketchbook and just sketching those heads from different directions. I haven't quite used it because I haven't quite got to the part where Jesus appears in Son of Man yet. But when he comes in, I will probably need to lean on that more, because if something doesn't look right, as an artist, it drives you insane after a while. Like, why doesn't this look right? It really should by now. I've ground a hole in my paper. So I think it'll be I don't want to be a crutch too much. I don't know if you like sometimes having like a little bit, using a maquette, using those pose dolls, or using your own reference photos where you're going like this. I'm not like too stuck in all that stuff. I just want it to be weird looking. So if it comes out of the drawing looking weird, that's what I think people are going to enjoy about it. But if the characters don't quite look the same from panel to panel, that's where people are going to be, or at least that's where I get kind of like taken out of the story. So I'll be kind of more careful with that stuff.
I think some of what you're just saying too, of like really just trying to capture that emotion, the uniqueness of the character, the world building and stuff. Is there like a difference between like a comic book artist and a cartoonist in your mind? Because like I think in some ways like a cartoonist maybe thinks, and I could be getting the technical details wrong, but they're thinking maybe just a little bit differently than like a comic book artist would. You'd know better than I do.
I have to think about that. What there are definitely people who use those terms interchangeably.
Yeah,
but there might be like a kind of an ethos that's slightly different behind each one. A cartoonist to me suggests someone that is unconcerned or uninterested in capital A art, but is making art. A cartoonist, I think, is sometimes making production art. They're making something that's designed to be printed, and they need it to be simple and easily printable. And a comic book artist is someone who maybe that's more like what you would use to describe like an auteur, someone who's much more in control. Gee, this is a good question. I don't quite know. I'm kind of writing this up.
Could be the worst question ever, because I don't have a good answer either.
It's a very interesting question, because there's definitely people that would be doing the same exact job. If like an alien, we're looking at these two different peoples, but one called ourselves a cartoonist. So it's probably just like a vibe thing, I guess. I'm definitely, what am I? Comic book artist.
Yeah. But it sounds like, you spent some time doing more cartoon single panel kind of stuff. So like that, I imagine that shaped you a little bit.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Those early days when I was just doing that, I was more obsessed with line work. And now that I'm doing all this mixed media stuff, line work is kind of like the first step, but it's oftentimes getting covered up, especially now that I've folded in. Do you ever use those Posca paint pens?
Oh, yeah. I bought a whole batch of like different colors, but I always use the white because it's a pretty good whiteout as well.
Great whiteout. Absolutely. I have those in there now, and I've got about 10 marker colors that I use pretty much for everything. I just have a pretty limited palette of 10 or 12 colors, and each one of those has a Posca paint pen twin. So I'm a lot more. I'm using
kind of have like that your little workstation here.
Yeah,
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Oh, that's that mess.
Just shove it in your face. But no, I thought it was cool that you like distinguished out your palette of markers. I sometimes just grab at them randomly. I like that there's even a little bit of organization there for consistency.
I do try. It does get that. That's right before I start. After I start, boy, that area looks like a bomb hit it. But you notice, like, once you're working fast, and especially with quick drying art supplies, you can really go super fast.
Oh, totally.
But you do see a lot of my line work, but now I'm using a very thin felt tip Japanese drawing pen called the Fude Nosuke pen.
I have one of those right around here. I use them all the time.
They're fantastic, and
they're Tombos, right?
Tombow, exactly. Yeah.
There we go.
Those almost end up becoming like my secondary pencil lines as those Poscas start picking up highlights. And so when I have like things that are side lit with like from multiple directions, all those lines on the outside are getting removed. I'm slowly kind of, in a weird way, the line work is getting less and less important to what I'm doing as my layering is becoming more of a factor of this current style. The layering is like pretty much the not just one thing, because like some people kind of are like, I'm trying to think of who, not Sienkiewicz, because he doesn't really have ink lines anymore, but some people usually like to color underneath their inks, but I'm going over them, and in some cases eliminating them after they're not useful anymore, and they're getting less and less important to the finish process, and might even be, I might be moving into a outline free world at some point. We'll see.
Yeah, kind of like a softer look, I imagine.
It is soft, but it shows depth so much better. You can really show.
Like his line flattens things. Yeah.
Absolutely, it really does. It puts things all on the same field. Once something is not lined, that's on top of a lined background, it pops out way far, almost in a 3D kind of a way. And that's what I like about this current style, because it really turns things into a more you can see when you look back in the drawing, you actually feel like you're looking back in the scene rather than just the paper. You know what I mean? It's kind of a trick of the eye. That's the kind of thing I'm going for.
Definitely. In terms of, like, just say creating any finished random drawing, so you got sketching, you got the line work, or you don't, and then you have the coloring, the marker, all that process. I guess, is there a piece of creating art that you enjoy the most?
Piece of
yeah, like the whole process. Like, some people love sketching, some people love rendering, and you can find enjoyment in all of them, but is there like a part that you just love the most?
I love, it might be specific just to what I do, but I love the finishing touches of highlights. Mm-hmm. Is when once I go in, it's usually the last thing I do, the glints on the armor, the dots and lights and so on. Once I do that final pass of usually that white Posca paint pen, it really begins to pop out. Always when I've done something where I know it's good, that last feel is what I'm going for. Is last, just like, oh, that last one going on, and you're done. It really is like a gush of serotonin.
Totally.
The other feeling that I really love is I think we touched on a little bit before, when you've done some bad drawing, but you turn it into something 10 times better than you ever would have done. That is the feeling.
You push through.
Really,
yeah.
Absolutely. When you're like, you feel, I don't know if you've made a mistake that kind of gives you depression briefly.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that's.
How am I going to recover from this?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And obviously that happens to all of us. But if you can worm your way out of that, and on top of it, it looks better or more unique. Even it's like this is based on a bad drawing, so it looks kind of odd, but it looks so much cooler than you ever could have purposefully done. I think that's maybe the thing that, if I'm a donkey, that's the carrot that is hanging over my head, keeping me going forward, because I love that feeling. It's happened. Son of Man is full of these, for some reason, bad drawing that I've managed to turn into something where I think people are going to like.
Do you think that's because you're going more ambitious, or you're diving more into the unknown and then kind of saving it? What do you think has led to that?
It's definitely both. This is a very ambitious book. It's going to be twice, maybe 3 times as long as FEND. FEND's 40-page story with another 20 pages of back matter. This is going to be maybe like 120 pages. It's going to be a big thing. And I'm about 25 pages in, and not every page, I would say at least in the last like 10 pages, I'm starting out a little bit depressed and ending up being like, this is going to be fucking great, dude. I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe how happy I am with it. It's really pushing the project forward. Because I don't know, like you're doing our first really big project. I worried that I'm going to stall out. I've stalled out once before on another one. That was like a whole other story, but you don't want to get so far in and then kind of lose your steam. I'm really happy that I'm kind of building on something, and I'm still trying to learn things, which is another thing that keeps me going too. Just you can track your growth making visual art. Obviously, you can see if you look at your sketchbook from page 1 to page 100, you can definitely track that there is growth there always. And I think that's the other thing that for sure is always going to keep me moving forward with it. I think
definitely
process.
When it comes to you, where you're at with the book now, are you like finishing each page completely and then moving to the next page? Or are you kind of more like assembly line, like I'm going to do 3 pages pencils, then come back and do like inks on them? Like, kind of what's your approach been for Son of Man so far?
I've been doing, it's my first book that's going to have double page spreads. You familiar with
yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, the classic thing. I've never done it. I've never really tried it. It's twice the drawing area.
Okay.
That I'm used to. It's a lot bigger. And so I'm working a little more ahead of the game. I still have not written this story. It's mostly up in my head, and I'm trying to let it come out organically as like the story goes. You know, like it's a little bit. I'm making comments where you can't really. It'll be hard to go back and fix things that don't work. So I really have to carefully just be like, I know what I want these people to do. I have to get them there. I know that I'm going to need a couple of things to happen along the way, so that this is like a fun story to read. It can't just be like a guy walks, you know, it's just too simple. I want it to be rich with diversions in it, like things that you think something is going to happen and it doesn't happen. And so I'm not, all of the writing is only in pencils, and I'm usually working in just 2-page chunks at a time, since every page has been a double page so far. Mm-hmm. And it's slowed down my conception of the story, because 2 pages in a row, all one image, takes me 3 to 4 days. It takes me, I don't know, like a day to pencil. I'm a pretty fast penciler. I'm a pretty fast inker, but a lot of it is the conception of it and the composition, and that'll take a few days. And then I can rip through and pencil and ink, and then in another couple of days, color it completely. So it's this kind of like snail pace where I just do these chunks. But with the double page spreads, I'm starting on the first half of the next page while I'm coloring the last page of the previous double page. So I'm kind of like at a weird pace with how the story is coming out, but I'm trying to like lean into that so that it's as weird as possible, which is important to me. I really don't want to make anything too normie. It's not really my I like it when people are confused, and I like contrasting ideas, you know. But to a certain degree, you kind of have to know generally what's happening, and that's where I'm leaving it. Just generally having a general idea, and as I start each new thing with the pencils, I'm learning what's happening myself, and then leaning into those like, oh, that's what's supposed to happen moments. And I when I first started, I tried to be a real writer. You ever do any proper writing, like screenplay or anything like that? No.
No.
It's really, really weird.
Work emails. That'd be my extent, you know.
Yeah, I can write you a couple of those. That's for sure. But I tried to properly write the whole story out, and when I did that, it was the most boring thing I couldn't believe how boring and simple it was. I knew that I was gonna be leaning mostly on how I draw, you know, leaning on the fact that like hoping it'll be weird and like that. But when I got to the story, I needed it to. It was not. There was nothing special about it. It was just kind of like a hero with 1,000 faces type thing. It was nothing to crow about. But once I decided to stop doing that and move, I feel like the story is coming more from like the deep middle part of my brain, and trying to find a way to live there sometimes, which is not a great way to get things done, and then also to be in the part of my brain where I know I need to get things done. So there's almost like the writing part of it is its own thing, and then the drawing and the inking and coloring is the part I don't super need to think too much about. So it's like a bifurcated approach with it.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing too with comics is there's so many different ways of going about the creation of it. You know, there's the writer and then the artist, and it's a clear separation. And there's like pros and definitely cons to that. And then there's people like you that are doing both. I guess when you're looking for inspiration or maybe even just a similar mind, you know, like do you seek out writer artist all within one person a little bit more in terms of the comics that you read, and can you kind of tell like when you're reading if you didn't know that like it's one person instead of like two or even like three people?
Well, the big giveaway when there's a writer is that there is a ton of writing on the page.
Yeah,
way more words than are necessary for a visual thing. But I don't know if I prefer the one. I like old school comics. I'm also a big fan of Golden and Silver Age comics. I love EC comics. I celebrate the entire form, you know, manga and Raw magazine. You know, I know that there's so many different ways you can do it. The kind of Marvel DC approach is 100% works really well to get stories out, because they know that not every artist is a good writer and not every writer can draw. So they found a way to make that work back then, and it does work. It's a little, I don't really read modern comics too much, the current stuff. I'm a little sad that they're still doing that kind of thing, but you know, leaning on that kind of like it's
dynamic. Yeah.
Yes, it's a what's the word? Not a assembly line style.
Right.
Back then in the Golden Silver Age, there's charm to it just because they were such in the Wild West of that form, and also that's when all these comics legends were being they were just kind of random guys that just got out of World War II, and all of a sudden they're making kids comics. I think that obviously didn't have any idea that in 50 years there'd be people getting like Jack Kirby tattoos and all that stuff. I do really, really like that stuff, and I still think there's a lot of good things to it too. But now when I read comics especially when I buy new comics, I'm usually buying creator owned. They're doing everything. I really like when someone is not diluting their personal vision with other people or outsourcing it to other people. I like when someone's doing everything. And I think that's kind of like, that's a thing I'd love to see come back a lot more, I think.
Totally. You brought up a good thing too that kind of got my mind going is like, besides different art style and then, you know, East versus West, I find it interesting that like some comic people are like so into comics, but they're not into manga at all. Like to me, they're not that different, you know, like, I don't know, kind of what's your take on that? Cause like, I read both. There is like different overarching things. And in some ways I like manga storytelling more, but kind of what's your take?
I think obviously in the next 20 years, there's going to be that line's going to get blurred as manga becomes the predominant entertainment choice for that kind of thing, for sure. And
it's definitely becoming way more popular.
Dude, I was just at Half Price Books, and they had 6 rows. You know Half Price Books? You know that company?
I have one. I go to it too often. Let's just put it that way.
Okay, good. Yeah, I love Half Price Books.
Yeah,
but I think they had like 5 to 6 full rows of nothing but translated manga. So that's clearly a sign of where the country is going, which I think is great. I think it's going to juice comics further on into the future by this sprinkle of salt from a different comics tradition. To kind of make all the new stuff sparkle. A lot of American stuff, it's kind of dull and played out. It's not exactly. It's lost a lot of its weirdness and its campiness and obviously its horniness. The Japanese comics, and they're going to bring in a lot of horny stuff, which is also totally fine. Not my cup of tea, but I'm just happy to see people reading that stuff. If there were people that complain about manga, I don't know them too much. I know they're out there. Or
they delineate too much, in my opinion. It's like there's like this really hard line, and for some reason, I guess because, like I said, I've enjoyed comics, but I've never really identified as like a big comic book guy until literally like the last like 3 years.
Okay. People in their mind, for sure, they keep them separate, even though they probably should all be shelved. You know, all the sci-fi manga should be in the sci-fi section. It's not a different thing at all. It's just, whatever. That's just their own, whatever these shops have to make decisions what they do. As far as the public consciousness, their tradition of comics, like I would love for America to get to the point to where Japan is with their comics culture. It's much more baked in. Adults read them, children read them. There's different comics for different groups of people. There's different comics. There's a comic to any kind of not even just like a sex kink, but like any kind of weird niche thing you like. There's a Japanese comic all about it, and there are 1,000 volumes. So once they start translating all that stuff, I'm going to be in heaven. I think that it would be nice to see that tradition filter into America. America will probably kind of squeeze it into something disgusting eventually, but if we can get this kind of like newer golden age of, I'm looking over at my manga right now, but there's a newer golden age of American comics that don't really treat it as much of like this weird niche thing when it's obviously not anymore. I might just be complaining about Gen Xers who in their mind comics are like, just like, what are you doing with your life?
Right.
But the Zoomers will have grown up with this stuff. They have already. And then the generation before them, even more so. And I think we'll have a very interesting thing here in the next generation. I think it will continue on. It'll turn into something, I think, good. I don't know for sure. I hope it continues a positive kind of resurgence of it, and the culture, the American mindset around it, that it's a type of book rather than just like a type of. I heard someone put it. It's like not a. It's a form, not a style, or something like that. I forget.
Yeah, I think there's just so much good manga out there, and some people, they diminish it without giving it like the proper chance. Like, I mean, and I think there's like a different storytelling style too that draws me in a little more. And I'm making generalizations, but when I read manga like Berserk or like Uzumaki, right? So ones that I've read recently, I feel like I'm watching a movie. Whereas when I'm reading a comic book like Watchmen, I feel like I'm reading a comic book. Like, I don't know how to really explain it. Like, there's something more cinematic to me with a lot of manga that I can find myself more hooked in, and I can go at a faster pace. But with like, for some reason with American comics and really good comics like Dark Knight Returns and stuff like that, I have to like read the page like twice because sometimes I don't even follow everything. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, am I stupid or why am I reading this page twice? But with manga, it's like I get that flow state easier.
I agree fully. They're coming from a different place. I think it's rooted still in American stuff, but they took it and ran with it in such a way. Their stories are compressed differently and in a more cinematic style. The edit points, the page turns when you're going from one page are used in a different way than in American comics. And I just don't think American artists. I don't want to generalize either. I guess I don't know who I'm complaining about, but I think maybe like your standard Marvel DC stuff. Those guys that make those comics, I feel like they just read comics.
Right.
Whereas I feel like artists from the manga tradition watch movies and read comics, but I think they mostly are just like cinema people. And that kind of compression level where the story flows at a rate that is maybe a higher page turn per second. How do you word that? It's meant to be read briskly.
Yeah, exactly.
And as a movie unfolds before you, you kind of enjoy it in that same way. But you're right, in American comics, it's a little more herky-jerky, and it's more about the poses and the moment and less about a flow. And I don't think they're necessarily concerned too much with evoking a certain kind of a flow, or even really controlling how fast your reader goes through the story.
Right.
For sure.
What would be maybe a few manga that you really, really love and have kind of stood the test of time?
I always recommend people to read at least several volumes of Lone Wolf and Cub. It's kind of you've heard of this one?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it though.
It's from the 1970s. It's by Kazuo Koike and Goseki Kojima. They're just two kind of working manga artists in the 70s. They happened upon this kind of like format. It was a weekly, it was released weekly in a magazine. So you only got like 5 or 6, 10 pages sometimes. In that 10-page story they figured out a way to pack in huge amounts of backstory and character development and unbelievable amounts of violence. Huge sword fights, but also philosophical questions, and they kind of ponder ideas to you that the characters are talking to them, but they really make you kind of wonder about it. There's a lot of things about war, and also just it's set in feudal Japan, so that's the background. But obviously the things they talk about in it are very applicable to those of us even in America. It's the human nature type things. So I always recommend that. Luckily they just got reprinted by Dark Horse, so you can get them or even at the library, I'm sure. Yes, there are 12 volumes, but I always say, like, just read the first one. It's a lot of fun. A lot of stuff happens, and it ends at kind of a note. The story just kept going for years and years. So I always like that one. And if you look on mycomicbookshop.com, it's just an online comic retailer. If you look for this series called 2001 Nights by Yokinobu Hoshino, it was that Dark Horse translated it in the 1990s and released it as a single issue floppy comic. So they kind of cut them up to fit American formats.
Interesting.
They put it out, and it is just the most beautiful, poetic. You'd never think, like, why'd they choose this kind of like soft, poetic kind of, it's a science fiction story, but it's very lyrical, and it's not harsh or silly. It's not like Akira where it's like action packed and explosions. It's
just, you have Akira right in front of me.
Oh, you do? Yeah, good.
I use it as a laptop stand. I have Berserk and Akira, and it helps prop my computer up.
I love it. Yeah. I keep them close. I keep Akira in my grasping distance.
Beautiful.
They're some of the best stuff ever. They're. I'm trying to think of anything else. I think people should read Akira. If one thing people take away from, if you liked the movie, and I guess I'm talking to your watchers, but if you liked the movie, or if you liked it so much that you're curious about the comic will reward you 20 times more than the movie, because so much more stuff happens, and they draw the hell out of everything. So I think
the space,
7 volumes of that.
I have a whole pile of stuff that I need to read. It's
Oh,
Do
me
you
too.
have that, or do you? Yeah, because it's like I buy and I find out, I look at the art. There's some stuff I buy literally just because I'm like, I like this art style and I want to refer to it if I'm like trying to find inspiration. Like I don't even plan on reading it, and I won't name any names, but there's just some art that it's just like I know I'm looking at for that purpose. But then there's some stuff it's like it could be the worst drawing ever, but if it's a great story, it's a whole different experience for me.
Absolutely. There are so many books where the art, if you just kind of looked at it while flipping through, it probably wouldn't do it too many favors. But when you go in there and read it, you're like, oh, this is actually perfect. And also, like, the art actually makes sense to it now. I love when that happens.
Totally. I got a whole list of questions, but I also want to like show some of your art because I feel like there's so many stories behind the creation of it. So I want to, give you the space for that.
Sure.
I do start out with FEND, and specifically when I was reading your blog, you said that this was the image that kind of kickstarted and made you realize that you could like do this. And I don't want to get that wrong, but maybe you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, this drawing, this was one. So this was in the era where I was just kind of doing kind of a character standing there looking cool, doing something cool. It wasn't intended for a story. There was no backstory to it. It was, I don't know, kind of fake comic book art, maybe like I was an artist making comic book themed art or something like that.
Right.
But
they're not going like fully in and story and all that.
No, absolutely not. I wanted to bake things into the character design to make you be like, it suggests a whole story. I thought that was a cool thing. And I was like, and then I don't have to do all the work of making a comic, but I ended up getting into it anyway. But this drawing, the panels behind it were because I drew the main guy, the guy with the kind of electro arm right in the front there. And then I'm pretty sure I was just like sitting on the couch watching TV. That's where I usually, unfortunately, do art, is watching TV on the couch. And I started just busting out these back panels, and I was like, oh, that kind of just like looks like something I'd like to read. You know what I mean? I didn't know quite what it could be. And I added the little figure in the back where they are in white was atypical of the kind of thing I normally drew as well. I was really drawing a lot of big buff dudes and gals with lots of armor and spikes and swords and all that stuff. But to have this kind of interesting kind of Zen character back there, it really kind of grabbed me for some reason. And I saw he has like these little kind of lines off of him. I was like, maybe he's like a little weird force field wizard or something like that. There's something there. And as I drew him, I thought about the two of them as like a duo. I was like a little kind of wizard guy and then this big brawling bruiser old man kind of character. Mm-hmm. And that was the earliest idea of FEND. This was the beginning of it, like this kind of duo, and they would be out in the desert and they would be kind of less like doing something. And that was all I needed to really get it started. I didn't even really design their villain until the first time I drew that character on the page. It was just like this kind of, I don't know if you have an image of it. They're kind of like this guy is made out of wires and stuff like that.
Maybe.
I forget if you did. That's okay. And that seed. Oh yeah, there's that guy in the middle there.
Okay.
That was the first time I really drew. Maybe I'd done a couple of dry runs, I think, but like I just kind of landed on that, and that was how he looked the rest of the time. And I once I realized that I had two people out there doing something, all I needed to do was set them down and make them walk towards somewhere. I don't need to have any kind of grand idea. I just had them walk towards something, and like they're following a trail, like they're detectives or something. So that was another thing that I was like, maybe they're like soldiers, or they're detectives, or they're, what do you call them? Who's dog? Like bounty hunters. Dog the bounty. They're bounty hunters. I didn't think of it. My brain is melting.
I got you.
They're bounty hunters, and all these questions. As I asked questions about the character, they kind of answered themselves, and it was simple enough to where I wouldn't have to be concerned, because a lot of my problems with comics obviously is really convoluted convoluted stories, too many characters, too many settings. I'm usually like, just have them. I don't think you really need to do all that kind of thing. I'm not really necessarily here to watch a movie. The comic form can do anything. You can have it do literally, as long as you can draw it, it can do anything, which is a huge power. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Something you can grab onto. And so once I had that in mind was when I kind of fell into the, like, I'll just have them kind of chase this guy and I don't know who will win. Once you read the comic, you'll see what I mean. And you'll actually probably, now that you know that I didn't know what I was doing, you'll probably be able to feel that a little bit, like, which is totally fine because that's exactly what happened. But I think it's still, from what I can tell from what people think about it, it is kind of vague and it is confusing, but in a way where it's, like I said before, it's leaving it up to you to kind of fill in the gaps as to why they're there and who they are. And
you're kind of just like pushed into a scene and you kind of figured out, like, I mean, I love movies that are like that. There's not a ton of exposition and it's just like you figure it out as you go. You're living in their life, Absolutely.
You're just walking, the movie starts and you just step into their life. Exactly. Maybe that was like Uncut Gems was something like that for me. You just kind of walk into the high energy and the anxiety and the paranoia of that world. So fun.
Movie gave me a heart attack, man.
It gave me. You want to know why I heard? Because did you hear about the camera they used for that?
No.
This is off topic. They used a camera that had an infrared sensor that was attached to its focus. So when they were filming Adam Sandler, whether he moved back, forth, to the side, or anywhere in the shot, he had a invisible infrared dot. The camera was trained on him. He remains completely in focus as the world shifts out in and out of focus. It gets close. And I think that's probably why it is an upsetting movie. It's got a strange, uncanny valley kind of anxiety feeling. I think it's because the camera does something kind of unusual that it used to. It's always on his face everywhere he goes. So.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of tension there. Got that. And then I also wanted to show just, these are like some like thumbnail sketches. Kind of, how does this part of the process factor into everything?
This is how each page starts. It's how I keep track of those page turns to make sure that they flow properly. But also, for FEND, I was really trying to figure out how I wanted to show action. The main thing I like in my comics, they show like kind of the physics world, like things feel like they hit. The timing of it feels like what's the word? It feels like you kind of feel a little bit more. And I do that by picking which moment before or after the action I choose to depict. Like sometimes when you show someone punching someone in the face, you can either show the punch connecting with their head and the blood squirting, or you can show the fist about to hit them, or you can show the split second after they've been punched and they've reeled back and the head is all crunched in, and you can really feel that more. And that moment hits a lot harder than if you were to choose anything on either side of it. And so with the thumbnails, I'm kind of controlling that, making sure that moment is as powerful as possible, especially during like the violent scenes.
This might be a weird question, but like what you just said with the punching and how you can like frame it in like multiple different ways, like, is that just something you intuitively have realized from reading comics your whole life and like just really studying them, being like, oh, this is why this artist did this? Or are there like books that you've read about creating comics that have helped you think like that? Because it's like, it's such a brilliant thing to say that you're just kind of like, oh yeah, this is how you do it, so quickly. It's impressive to me because it's a whole different way of thinking about creating an image, especially like an image that's conveying motion or emotion or something like that.
Sure. It is something that it's a thing you noticed over the year. I've read, I wish I could turn my camera. I've got a really, really enormous collection of comic books. I've read quite a bit. I pretty much read them all. I have a day job, but I wake up in the morning and I'll read something. It's a big part of my life. I try to enjoy the entire world of comics everywhere they come and take as much as I can from them as possible. I'm not trying to steal, but I eat comics, you know.
Oh yeah, it's become part of your DNA. Yeah,
Eat the idea of it, and it comes out different but better. I wonder where I got that. I know I've definitely heard. Do you know who Daniel Warren Johnson is?
Name sounds familiar, but no.
He's a guy that he's a metal guy too. You would probably like his work quite a bit. But he has spoken about that. He's a guy. He has a YouTube show. He does a Transformers comics now. He's a much bigger artist. He's also done character creator.
Oh, I've seen some of his work now. I remember it because I think some of like his individual pieces were sold by Felix Comic Art.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
oh,
so I follow his page. Yep.
Cool, absolutely. He's like one of the great guys. He picks his moments. He's probably one of the first guys where I noticed like not only can you pick your moment, you can pick a moment. If you the further you push that weird moment back or forward, you can increase that power. You can increase that like feeling of like getting crushed or getting whacked or something even more. I think I learned that definitely from reading his comics. And thankfully, being able to talk to him in real life, he's a really nice guy who like responds to DMs and is answers questions. And also his YouTube show, which I recommend to people. He gives an incredible amount of insight into his process, and he's like what I would say like he's the real deal for comics, and his just everything else is just that he does is he's the real deal.
What his YouTube channel, is it his name or is it a name of a show?
I think it's called his channel is just called Daniel Warren Johnson.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
I hope you do. I've lost you here. He will just set up the camera over his desk and be working on his own comics page, which I love when people I can see them working and see what they're doing.
Totally.
And then as someone has a question in the chat, he will stop and like explain what he's doing and why he's doing it. It is an incredible resource for anybody.
David Finch too. He's similar kind of approach with the live streams and stuff.
He does one too?
Oh, dude, David Finch's stuff is awesome. It's very helpful too. He did this Green Goblin like mixed media piece. I mean, every Monday he's doing something, but that particular piece, the process, I really documented it and incorporated airbrush into my first painting, and I have him to thank for like incorporating that, you know, amongst other artists too, but like literally showing how he's doing it and like with the matte mediums, very helpful.
Absolutely. Demystifying.
Yeah, dude, I'm huge fan of David Finch's YouTube channel, and I really like his art too, like all the heavy shadow stuff. That really is something I just like really love. Big dramatic Bernie Wrightson, you know, like kind of shadows and stuff.
I'm trying to factor in a lot of that, having lots of shadows and big black areas and stuff too. And Bernie is a great.
I know, man. It's bold. It's hard too. It's way harder than, you know, I think people maybe realize, because you have to be so decisive.
And going back a lot of times, back is another sad part. Do you only do black and white? You said you did airbrush, so you're doing full color paintings. What is the?
Yeah, I do both.
Okay.
I do. So with my paintings, watercolor is a big part of the process, and right now I'm doing about half and half, black and white, you know, pen and ink stuff, because that's good for merch designs for bands, and I also know how it'll print. I'm still figuring out painting wise, like how I'd incorporate that into, you know, commercial work, because I kind of just do it for myself at this point. And but yeah, I definitely getting better, so I'm happy with that.
And doing it by yourself, that's when all the good stuff is going to start.
Yeah, exactly. People will find it, I'm sure.
Can I, real quick, I sort of stop you, but you said you airbrush too. Do you do that inside your house?
Yeah, it's all water based.
Okay,
paint.
With the mask and everything, all that stuff. I've heard that. How does that work?
I should wear a mask.
Oh no!
I've literally only done it once. It's very tiny. It's like hobby little miniature stuff. I'll wear a mask next time, but I think just the scale in which I was working, it didn't seem like it was a big problem. It's all water based paints, but I should wear a mask. But we're not talking like a giant whole setup thing.
The big compressor. I kind of like feel like I want to get into that, but I don't know if I want to have a giant air compressor in my apartment.
It's really not that daunting. The biggest thing with the airbrush that's just the pain is cleaning it, because if you don't clean it and it gets clogged, it's very hard to fix. And I think, I mean, me and you, we're not, digital artists, but it's so much easier to have an airbrush look digitally. So I think that's why people like go to it so much. But a lot of my inspirations, the 70s and 80s, fantasy type artists, and that's what they would do to knock out those paintings quick is, airbrush is fast once you get going, but it's messy. It's a pain to clean. But I actually don't think it's as hard as maybe people think it is. Once you get a little bit of like finger control, it's not that bad.
It's that weird little lever too, right? You gotta I
have like a dual action, so you press it down, and you have to get used to like always keeping that air pressure on, and then you just nudge it back, and it's a little bit of muscle memory. And look, I don't know everything about airbrush, but you watch like a couple hours of videos, do a little bit of practice. If you're just using it as like a flat background and you mask off areas you don't want to cover, it's really not that bad. And that's how I would intend to use it anyways. Like, artists like Mobius, he wasn't like using airbrush as his like main thing. It was all just about flat backgrounds. And
he just wanted to quickly cover the area and start.
Exactly. Make it look clean, no brush strokes. So like that's all I ever really want to use it for, is just no brush stroke stuff.
Yeah. Clean gradients too. I mean, I love nice gradients.
Yeah.
They really sing, especially like in Unreal, not non-digital stuff. The digital gradients, they work, but of course it's missing a little something about about it being real. I think that people kind of have lost an appreciation for. I actually, it doesn't work that well, but I've started using, I point a canned air container at my Posca pen.
Oh, really?
The for cleaning out.
Like the computer duster stuff?
I tried it. It actually works pretty good. I masked off the area with like a bunch of like scrap paper and Post-it notes, and then I loaded up the pen with ink. You would kind of like tap it and get it loaded up. Pointed it right at where I wanted it to go, about this far back, and just went like that, like a straight line across. I knew I couldn't quite get it right at there, and it would fly around. It made a really nice, perfect thing. I feel like I got really lucky with it. But I think I will actually, if I'm going to do an airbrush thing or to seek out that effect or whatever, I'll probably get like some kind of a thing and do it, because it just seems so fun.
Yeah, and you don't need any like fancy setup. Like there's the kit I bought, it's maybe like $150, and like, it's for the purpose that I'm going to use it for. A lot of the pros that use it in this similar way, they're not buying fancy airbrushes. It's just like, just kind of a little thing that you use every once in a while, and then you forget about it. It's like not even spoken about that much in a lot of cases.
Do you like clean out the cleaning out the nozzle thing is a real pain in the nuts?
Well, yeah, and part of it's just like me doing extra because I don't want it clogged at all, because I've heard so many horror stories of it. So I take the whole thing apart like every time, which maybe eventually I won't, but that's the most common thing, is it gets clogged, and it's a big pain to clean out. So I'll like strip it out, take the needle out, rub it with the paper towel, and so far it's been fine. But
it sounds like when I used to have Rotring technical pens. I don't know if you ever used those technical pens.
No.
That's what you had to do. You had to take it when you were done. You had to pull the case apart and empty it, and then the tips were so tiny, you had to use a little blower thing to blasting. It was just like,
Have you ever played around with like nib pens, like dip pens and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. A few years ago, I bought a nice box of like vintage steel dip pens on eBay. They were like dead stock from I don't know, but I've been using them a little bit. I have a sketchbook that I just do red ink in. It's just like my personal sketchbook, and I use a dip pen, and I am not good at it, but I really appreciate when you can get something. Once you realize that those like EC Comics guys were using these things too, you know what it can do, and then when you see yourself do it, you're like, well, how do I cross this distance I need to get where they were? But they were from a different era and a different tradition. I would love to get into using dip pens. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I think that might be like the next frontier. I really like the brush look, so I still use like Winsor Newton brushes every once in a while. But it's interesting because this isn't supposed to be on me. I'm talking too much. But like, I really love like Japanese art, like, you know, traditional Japanese art with like the really interesting ink lines and stuff. So sometimes I feel like, am I drawing more from that, or am I drawing more from like, you know, the comic kind of style of the, I don't know what you call it, but you know, those typical lines where it just kind of like fades and tapers.
Right. That's a cool little contrast point, though. So you're doing like the Sumi E type ink, the stuff.
I love that stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff on my Instagram and a lot of my reference books, a lot of it is, you know, traditional Japanese art and Japanese tattoo art, even like my back here, because I just love those expressive and interesting lines. And I even have some of the cicada wing rice paper. I haven't really used a lot of it, but that's, you know, I got it right from Japan. I had to pay quite a bit in shipping, actually.
And you haven't used it yet? I know exactly what you're talking about. That stuff is so delicate, right? It's almost...
oh, man. It's... Yeah, I mean, they shipped it well, but, like, there's a whole section that's, like, all crinkled, and I really can't use it. Yeah, I bought it, and I haven't used it. And I think it's just... Sometimes, man, it's just you just get... like obsessed with something, and then by the time it arrives, you're already on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So like, I feel guilty about it, you know, but it's
waiting there for you.
Yeah,
that's a whole different. And plus, also, you know, there's that learning curve with using those tools too. But I hope you get back to it.
Yeah. Well, let's keep progressing here. So, is this the back cover then, with the two heads there?
Yeah, that's the back. Oh, excuse me. That's the back cover, and then those are the inner flaps. There, the page ends for the book.
And you had there was a hardcover first edition, and then the soft cover was second, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the hardcover sold out. The first run was like 500 copies, and the second was the second one has been out for a year. It's all soft. I just gave away my last copy, unfortunately, but it's a really nice, thick, like sort of kind of mildly glossy paper that really catches the color too, especially really kind of muddy colors. It handles it so well.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then this got reviewed in like the Comics Journal, right? I guess, what was that feeling like reading that and just kind of, I don't know, having your stuff like be actually like criticized? Like, what does that feel like?
That was, well, first of all, I don't know if you ever read the Comics Journal.
Don't.
You don't. I have been reading that for, 25 years. It's been around since the 70s, but I've always read it. It's one of the early websites I ever read, getting on the internet, because it was one of the very early ones that were on there. They're like kind of comics news site. So showing up on there, I didn't ask for it. I'm proud to say they did it on their own. The guy found me, and I don't quite know how reviewing works. Like, do I have to send copies? I'm never really sure. So they got their own, and I got about as good a review as you can get on there.
They're pretty critical.
Making this kind of comic, especially, they're pretty critical. They're mostly indies. They do a lot of international, French and Italian stuff. Old world comics, like old Disney and Mickey Mouse and so on. So like, they're not quite, they also don't, as a rule, do any kind of standard science fiction stories with like punch 'em ups and stuff like that. There's like some kind of exceptions they make, but for the most part, they don't do things like that. So I was really surprised that they wanted to review this book, which on its face looks like a normal kind of comic book story, like a bunch of big guys having it out.
Mm-hmm.
When I showed up on there, And the fact that it didn't get destroyed. The guy had some criticisms, and I was like, I am just so happy to be here that the criticisms don't sting. I think he said, what did he say? He said, well, he said something about all the lettering in it is just my own handwriting. I don't do any kind of big, like boom or kablamo around there. Yeah. It's all just a single line of text somewhere in the image, just saying what sound is happening in my handwriting. And I think that's where he was like, "This doesn't work." And I was like, "Well, whatever." I didn't really want to do that sound. I almost wanted to have it be like a silent comic book, but also I wanted it sound to have a dimension. Like when the characters are walking through kind of an echoey area, I make sure people know that it's an echoey kind of cavernous area using a little explainer for that. And I was not sure people were going to like it. Luckily, the people who I have told me that they liked my comic in person said that was one of their favorite parts, like this interesting sound effect approach that I was shooting for. So when TCG said that didn't really work, I was like, that's exactly the kind of thing they wouldn't like, and I love it. I'm just happy to be on there. So I don't think I've gotten a shitty review yet. There's some stuff out there on Reddit kind of dragging me, but that's Reddit. Who cares?
Fair enough. All right, we talked about this is Workstation and the beginning of Son of Man.
Yep.
What is this?
This is the thesis statement of the book. This was like a concept drawing I did to sort of describe the kind of energy of this story and what the thrust of it was. I do a lot of, for Son of Man especially, I've done a lot of preparatory full drawings of the Jesus character and his three little helper buddies here. They've all been kind of workshopped to death, and they're as done as I could possibly get them. But this was one of the early ones where I wanted to show them all together at once to give me an idea of what this world felt like. And it's not going to quite look like this anymore. Jesus is not going to quite look the same, and these characters are going to look a little bit different as they progress. But it was the moment where I unlocked the aesthetic of the book that I'm going to stick to, and I could show you all my concept art is taped up everywhere. You can see little pieces of all my drawings I tape up, and I put them on the wall everywhere I look while I'm working to remind myself what I have already done, to start feeding that into the story. Because like I said, the story is like kind of, there's not too much pre-planning for each page. And so I have all these characters and I'm just waiting to move them from up here into there and have them do things.
It's a really interesting, approach to just creating a comic. I guess in terms of like tackling something with religious themes, what led you to do it this go around? What inspired it,
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the thrust of the story is going to be about Christian hypocrisy, modern Christianity and its hypocrisy. It's like nothing new to criticize modern Christianity for not really doing what that guy directly said for them to do, and then twisting his words, do all kinds of weird, shitty stuff. And it'll be a direct criticism of that, but I'm really trying to make it be also not be a dour and unfun and kind of, what's the word? I guess unfun is the best I can do. I want it to still be a fun thing, but also, much like FEND, there will be kind of like a little bit of a political dimension to what there's some people, if they're looking for it, will be very clearly able to tell what I like or don't like about what I'm saying in the story. This one will be more overt. It's going to have a ton of Christian symbolism. I've watched pretty much every single depiction of Jesus's life cinematically that have come out in the last year, like Passion of the Christ, obviously, but also all the old Fritz Lang New and Old Testament silent movies.
Mm.
And also they've made many depictions of the life and death of Jesus, obviously pretty much like one a year for the last history of cinema. He's a very popular character, and I always liked the cinematic portrayals of it. There's this one in particular, this movie called The Greatest Story Ever Told, where you really feel the pain more, you feel the fear, you feel his being unsure of. Have you ever seen like the Last Temptation of Christ, the Scorsese Jesus movie?
I haven't.
It kind of highlights Jesus's it really kind of brings the questions that I want to talk about in the book, about the hypocrisy and all the his word and his life being distorted to meet any number of needs that the person who's distorting it wants. And I was like, my idea for this is, what if Christianity continued well into the far-flung future of humanity? We're in a real dystopia. The world is crushed, but there are still Christians, but there's also high technology, and the mingling of Christianity and its tenets with a world that is so far beyond that kind of thinking and is so far beyond those kind of needs. What would they do if Jesus came back? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What would the second coming of Jesus is actually, he's come back and he's a robot and he's quite upset with everybody. You know what I mean? It's something like that. I don't want to ruin it too much. It'll be.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm trying to thread a bunch of needles at once with it too. I want to make a book that sells, but also it's a very personal indictment of what I think is a huge problem with it. I grew up Christian. That's obviously a huge part of that too. It's coming from a lot of that stuff. My mom was a Quaker, and I grew up just living in that world pretty heavily, and I slowly edged out of it as I got into punk and got out of my parents' house. You kind of once you get out in the world, you kind of, some people lose their you kind of like the grip. Once the grip gets lost on you, you kind of start to notice the cracks, and you learn more. So it's maybe more for those people who have experienced that. I'm not exactly going to be changing minds with this thing, so it's mostly going to be a lot of fun to read. And if you're like me, you'll get a lot more out of it because I'll put a lot of my personal opinions and experiences into that as well.
I think the concept's awesome. I'm very excited about it. You sold me.
I think it's sweet. Yeah, it's the tagline I tell everybody is Jesus's revenge on the Romans. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's going to be like that. It's a revenge movie. I'm watching a lot of Grindhouse movies too, and I'm trying to get a lot of good, cool energy with this too.
Awesome. So we got some like solo characters here. I just pulled these from your site. One thing from like a technical detail that I thought was really cool, this one on the far right, is using like deleter sheets.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of like putting a little bit of manga in there,
Oh, have you ever used them?
No, dude, God, this is just making me feel bad. I have a sheet of deleter stuff that I bought like 2 years ago and I've never used. I haven't really had the reason to, but yeah, you just kind of like rub it, right? Is that like how it works?
It's covered. It's the back of it is there's an adhesive on it that is no stronger than a Post-it note. It's a wax-based adhesive, so you can take things off and move them around however you want. Most people just take the sheet to cut off the section. Say you're like doing some guy's pants, or whether you want to use a dot pattern for the pants.
Okay.
You cut just enough to cover the pants and stick it all down on the paper. And then with an X-Acto, very carefully cut away everything you don't need, and it just peels right off in one.
Okay.
Off of the edges, like the top and the
like
side.
Using Frisket tape, kind of. Okay.
It really is, yeah. That or masking, yeah, exactly. Masking tape, Frisket tape, all those things. It's you're subtracting rather than adding, and it looks, especially in real life, I think it is like a really compelling art supply. It really adds an extra special something when you have a little bit of that that pattern on there, especially in mixed media.
Yeah.
Younger people have absolutely no idea how you do that kind of thing. Like, how'd you draw the dots like that? You have to show, like, that's actually a 50-year-old piece of technology, and you just buy it at. But now I think people are more aware of it. I hope it comes back. It's a very
people use it digitally all the time.
People use it. I use it digitally too. Whenever I get a new sheet, I scan it.
Oh, so, really? Yeah.
On some pieces, you sent maybe later on the deck, you'll see some things where I've used scanned screen tones just because it's an expensive art product. But I use it on my finished drawings sometimes because it adds grit. And I really like it. I have a ton of, think about your sheet. I have a ton of sheets where it's just like these incredibly strange little leftover pieces that I kind of just chip. I'm not really one that wastes anything. So I'll keep adding those little bits of screen tone.
Well, you got to import it in from Japan. It's expensive stuff.
It is expensive stuff. I think it's like $14 a sheet now.
Yeah.
What I did was the reason why I scanned things was I went on eBay a few years ago and I bought a box of dead stock screen tone sheets. Like they were they weren't Deleter. They were this other.
There's Zipatone. That's like the old.
Zipatone was another one. I forget what this one was. I forget. It starts with a K maybe. Just about a big box of weird old ones. And I, of course, have used them all since up. But someone told me like you should scan those because they're printed. They're not the ones I bought were made probably in the 60s. So they were mechanically made, not computer made. And so they've got a lot of extra little
imperfections.
Imperfections that kind of will make your drawing feel a lot more handmade, even though you're using a pre-made thing. It'll give it something that the eye really enjoys to look at. Digital ones that like I also make my own dot patterns occasionally if I need them, and they're never nearly as compelling as the real stuff. It's too perfect.
Yeah. Like it's such a cool way to do like that smoke there,
Yeah, I don't know how I got lucky because the whole middle section here where it's cross coming out of the hole in the belly and coming across, there's no drawing underneath that. It's just the screen tone and the paper. So you kind of have to like know what you're not going to draw ahead of time with it sometimes.
Totally. And I just pulled these because they're like a good example of like those solo characters. Do you remember like, are these like 5-6 years old or are these more recent?
These are like 5 or 6 years old. These are like the early days of me kind of getting into this aesthetic. The one on the left there, the fellow with his arms up fighting, that was the first time where I like could not believe that I made something that I thought was like, how did I make something that looked like that? I don't know how. It was an accident, I was just kind of grinding away on an aesthetic, and that's a drawing right there. It's the first drawing on my website that pops up. It's the one I'm the most proud of. I'm like, this is the coolest looking thing. And so I'm always chasing this dragon. This guy is exactly what I want to hit. There's a lot going on in it. When you zoom in and you see the way the markers kind of go over each other, there's a lot of intermediate tones that come up that just makes it work. And I want that to be my central look to everything I do, especially in this book. I want it to be eye-popping.
Totally. And another kind of just technical question, but with the Copics, do you use the sketch ones or you use the originals? And have you noticed a difference between the two at all? There's just a different shape, to the actual thing.
One's got the sort of brush tip and the other one's got the more of the felt stubby tip.
Yeah, and I mean, you can replace those out to, I think they call it the bullet for like the stub, if I'm not mistaken. But it's more that square kind of feeling in your hand with the originals. But like with the sketch ones, which I think are more comfortable in the hand, I have a problem with them drying out because they're not closing all the way. I don't know if you experienced that. Yeah. If you don't keep, and I try to, close them up, but sometimes they just don't snap, Yes.
I've lost many, I've had quite a journey with the Copics. I used to, like we all did, you probably bought 1 million of them before you realized you could refill them yourself if you really needed to and save yourself $8 every time.
Yeah.
So I think I always kind of stick with the squared off ones. Those are the classic ones, right?
The classics, yeah.
Those the brush pen tips do dry out, and I found that when they get overfilled, which does happen, or especially if it's very humid out, they leak badly. So I don't really use those too much. I think I've got a couple strange colors over there, but for the most part, I like the bullet or whatever the square classic where you have like the wedge on one side and the little stubby guy on the other.
Right.
Yeah, and I've got Copic wides, which are fantastic. They don't make them anymore.
Is that good for like covering big areas? Or?
Yeah, it's a big wedge, just like the wedge size, but it's about.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can buy them still. They're empty, so you refill them with your own colors if you want. But I've been doing all my fill in with these big wide ones, and I'm never going back. They're fantastic.
Nice.
Because just like if you have like an area where one page you want to have a big flat wide area of color, you're going to get all those strokes if you're not careful. But when you have the big pen, and then you can just blend it across, and it looks like a flat color.
Do you use a blender in that case, or you just do like another coat a different direction, and it just kind of evens out?
I usually do 2 coats. I don't really use the blender too much unless I'm doing a gradient. If I find cause where I need to do a gradient between 2 colors, that blender is pretty useful, but I don't use it too much.
Do you feel like overall markers just in general are kind of an underrated medium?
Absolutely. I think having quick drying art supplies it certainly stopped me from worrying about losing momentum during the art process. I was able to gain a huge amount of momentum with my quick drying Posca. Those are water based. You've used them. They dry in a couple seconds. The brush pen I use and those Tombow pens, all very quick. Those kind of are what, in a weird way, the fact that they're quick drying are how I grew as an artist really quickly, because I was able to produce a lot of stuff. And I didn't have to wait for anything to dry. I didn't have to worry about the way certain things interacted with each other. Obviously, some with mixed media, things are going to interact kind of weird, water-based or alcohol or whatever. But with the markers on the Poscas, I could produce a fully finished thing where I was like, I've made a complete drawing, and I'm like looking at it, and I'm able to like learn about what I've done, and I've done it much faster than I would be for something else. It allowed me to make big leaps in growth.
Totally. Yeah, I think markers are great, man. I love using them, and there's so many different ways you can apply them too. Have you seen how Wrightson use like the markers for like those FPG trading cards? Like I have a book of like, it's called like Wrightson the FPG years, but he has like these really interesting like marker paintings because he's using them like impressionist. You know what I mean? Really loose. It's cool.
FG, what's it called? I'm gonna write it down.
So it's the FPG trading card series. There's a book that just has all those, trading cards blown up into a nice art book, and it's a blend. He has watercolor stuff in there. He has I don't know, oil paintings, but acrylic paintings, and he has some like marker pieces, and they're really cool.
I think when you in the when would it have been in like the 80s when they found a new way to print comic colors that went, instead of cutting out clear gels to use for the guides for the printers to use, they developed the blue line method where you print out you pencil and ink even your entire comic page, and then there's a process there where they would print it out on a clear piece of plastic acetate, and then you would put another piece of paper underneath them and then color underneath, and then they could print from that. So you'd have really black blacks and also your colors. In those early days, they were all using markers, I've noticed. And I think that's something that I maybe noticed when I was a kid, because I could tell when the marker cuts across itself and creates a little marker-shaped blotch. As a kid, I noticed that, and I was like, this motherfucker's using markers. I have those. It was kind of like a moment where I realized, I was like, for some reason, and I didn't for years and years use it, but when I got into using markers again, I definitely was like, people do make comics this way, and I think this should come back because it's a really, it feels real. It feels, but it also has that kind of like human kind of feeling to them. With those, when you cross over on yourself, that I think people really like, and I personally like to look at too.
Totally.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was a story behind this. Just I like the aesthetic of this, and yeah, what is this? I have no context.
This is one of my first experiences trying to make any kind of comic story. This is when I realized I had this style, and I was like, I should get some of these characters kind of moving along. This was the first thing I tried. It's about 27 pages. It is the art of it is all is on paper, but it is black and white. So this one is actually me trying to be computer coloring.
Okay.
Trying to work into computer coloring, because I think back then I was more concerned with, like, I was like, I should like producing comics is easier from a computer if you're coloring it with a computer, because it can be tinkered with after that. When I do it on paper, obviously that's just the way it looks, and I have to work with that. So I
reproduction part too.
Absolutely. Instinctively, I wanted to get into computers, and I knew that was just what this is before I don't know where I was in my head when I was working on this, but it was there was no story. I knew I just wanted to have these characters kind of jump across a bridge and have it be kind of fun and more like a video game. And I think there's some jankiness to it, which is fine. I was just getting started out, but there's some parts where I definitely was like, this does not work, and I should not do that anymore. Or this is definitely something that I need to, that I personally want to get better at, especially like figure work and foreshortening, which I'm sure is foreshortening is one of those things that's just it plagues even the most incredible artists. Everyone struggles at some point with it.
Yeah. Too much, too little. I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, does it look like a weird baby arm, or but this was a great learning experience. I still like this one a lot, and it's for if anyone wants to read it, it's for free up on my website too.
Awesome. I picked this up because I thought it was cool just to see some sketches and like thumbnailing. I think I pulled this from your Instagram, but are these like some sketches for Son of Man?
Yeah, these are all for Son of Man. This is all me trying to get through the first few pages of Son of Man, which were kind of like pulling teeth getting those first pages of something done. Is
it just like emotionally daunting, or like what is it like kind of starting something with a blank canvas like that?
I don't know if it's emotionally daunting. I love making comics, and it's my main hobby now. So I wasn't daunted. I definitely can't accept, like, I need to be sure that it's clear storytelling. I'm very a messy, busy, detailed cartoonist or artist or whatever. So that does not help with a clear story. And I was lucky to figure that out early on. Like, it does need to, if I'm going to be busy and have a lot of details and lots of blinking lights and things, I need to be cognizant of the fact that the story does need to move forward if you want to have that kind of experience. So these pages, I was kind of trying to establish my language. In fact, the first few pages of this, you see on the right, left here, I don't know how to stage right, of the two kind of cooling towers with the green.
Okay, yeah. So left image.
The left image, yes. You can see those early pages are just two panels. So it's just like cause, effect. Each page is like a cause, effect, cause, effect. It's a rhythm I was trying to establish. And so the first few pages of Son of Man, it really is like a 1, 2, like a beat of a drum almost I'm trying to do. And then slowly it just becomes more and more weird and wild. And I start adding shapes that break up those two kind of panel shapes on the left there to disrupt the rhythm, but also to be able to go back to that rhythm.
It's like establishing, and then I think it also kind of reminds me of like the, on the first day God created this, second day God created that. Like it's kind of reminds me of that.
I love hearing that because he sure did all that stuff. I had something else to say, but I kind of lost it. These are just my kind of early trying to do this like lightning effect behind these two, and have it be very. I mean, talk about cinematic. I really want elements of this to be very cinematic, just because I like cinematic comics. They're not all like that, but I do like it when you kind of recognize like, oh, this is kind of like an old 50s horror movie or something like that. So I'm kind of shooting for that here.
Very cool. I just thought this character was badass, and it also shows what you were talking about earlier of like doing different angles to like figure out a character.
My sketchbook is all just heads being drawn in different directions, trying to learn how to do that. These guys are going to be like the security force in Rome. They're going to be like the centurions.
Okay.
They're all going to be smoking cigarettes.
Nice.
I feel like, I don't know why I think that's funny, because they're all going to have mustaches and be smoking cigarettes like all the cops in Chicago. So that's more that character design, trying to be like have it be very clearly Roman centurions, but also updated in my style. It's kind of tricky to get it to look right, but I think these.
Oh, they look awesome, man.
People are going to get it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And then this is like fully armored out on the left. What does it say? Respect me.
Respect me. Yes. This is they're going to be like those same guys. They'll have like the Roman kind of column. Their armor look like Roman columns and things like that. I'm kind of building all that ancient Rome stuff into it to call back.
That's cool.
It. But this is my representation of the many video footage, video footage we saw of the riots in the last few years, and you seeing riot cops out there who are shouting literally like, everybody calm down, and so mad and screaming in their faces and like having the batons and stuff. And it struck me as so funny to be like, you're not respecting me, you gotta calm down. And everybody being this big ripped guy with all his toys strapped to him and his little walkie-talkie and stuff. So I'm going to be kind of poking fun at that, what my experience watching all that stuff, and also seeing, like, I live in Chicago. There's most of our cops are kind of looking like that all the time these days. They're all wearing all their shit all the time. So at least what I've noticed. So I'm trying to, in my way, get people to notice that more often, using the history of the crumbling of the Roman Empire and how it happened and how it's uncomfortably similar to our own reality here. And to kind of, I'm not out there to change anyone's mind. It's just my own personal thing I like to complain about, and I'm definitely going to put it in the comic. So that's what that is.
It's safe to say you've been thinking about the Roman Empire a lot lately, huh?
Brother.
You are the meme.
Yeah, yep. Oh, my wife, when she heard about that, she knows I have those books, and she knows I'm not like into the war part of it. I love like Pompeii and stuff.
Yeah. But
when she learned that meme, whoa, she could not stop laughing directly in my face. And
that's great. This guy on the right, I think I pulled them from a few years back. I just really thought the lighting was cool. You were talking about that earlier, like using this like kind of warm side lighting to make a character more dynamic. I'm Mr.
It's everywhere in every drawing I do. I just like it, and it makes things more, for me, for some reason, it just seems more like heightened, like things are flashing and flaring behind them. Mm-hmm. And there's so many, there's gonna be a running joke in Son of Man about how every time Jesus shows up somewhere, there's a huge bolt of lightning. He's like backlit, all dark, and then there's a huge bolt of lightning like Batman behind him, and he's all fully lit. But it'll happen every single time he shows up, and that'll be like, I hope, like a running joke. So there'll be a lot of that, and to me, that's just like, oh, the backlighting is now like a part of the story. So it's a thing I figured out how to do early on, and now it's like it's something I try and factor in as much as I can. I just like how it looks.
Oh, and then talk a little bit about Carry Your Bag. Kind of like what inspired this, and kind of like what is this world that you're creating with this particular comic?
This one started out, this one is a little bit different. I started drawing it, and it's all out here in a blog I've written in the past. I guess I won't kill the mood too much by going super deep into it in the video chat here, but I've written a lot about what happened. My the end of my mom's life was a couple of years ago. It was super challenging and very confusing, and just one of those things. Obviously, it happens to almost everybody, and no one has a good time with it. My reaction to it was to kind of cope with it by doing a daily comic strip. So I was managing her life with my brother and my sister-in-law and some of her friends during the day, also trying to work. And at night, I was getting really strung out. I was having a really hard time stop thinking about it. And so I just decided to try and do a daily, or even maybe a change to weekly, a weekly web comic on Instagram, which has obviously 10 slides. You can slide the image 10 times. And so once I saw that, I was like, oh, that could be 10 pages of a little story. And so once I knew that I had 10 pages to work with, that became, I can make something interesting happen in 10 swipes, and it will read very well on Instagram if I don't make it too detailed, and if I make it not too colorful like this. These are all black and white, or rather they're just gray markers that are scanned in color. But too many colors, I think, would, again, the same thing, making sure the story is clear. I just thought, like, if I were to make it full color, it would be too time consuming and hard to read. So I just decided to stick to just a couple of gray colors, and I'd taken this kind of funny little doodle of the one before, the spaceman with his dog. That was the first time right there. That's the first time I drew the carrier bag character. And I started it with the intention that it would be a funny slice of life, kind of sweet natured kind of a thing about a guy or a person and their dog, and they're on an alien planet and they live in harsh climate, but it's nice. My mindset then was not great. So it pretty immediately became a place where I was processing all these difficult emotions. And I'm not exactly directly talking about it in these stories, but that's kind of why I was there. I was like needing something to do, needing something else to think about, but also it was before I had a therapist. I needed to also process all this stuff in a weird way. So as you read through it, and again, it's all free on my Instagram page, it starts out kind of silly. It then gets kind of weird, and then within like 3 or 4 episodes becomes the darkest, gnarliest thing I've ever made in some portions. And it went on for a few months. I want to say I ended up doing about 500 pages of these. It just went on and on. No plot. I had no idea what was happening. It was just another character that I would just make them do something and see what happened. And I could not believe it, but it actually worked and made me feel better. And so I just kept doing it. And I did it through the time where my mom actually finally passed away. And then the period after that, I was very sick. I got shingles, and I had just a terrible time at work, and it just kept being there. I kept doing it even when I had shingles, and you know what shingles are?
Oh yeah.
Even going through that, when I had them on my face too, it was very painful. I still, for some reason, continued to make it, but those when I was sick and also very upset, I don't remember making those comics, those episodes, those issues of Carrier Bags. So when I look back at them, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. And to me now, I'm like, that's so cool. Who is this person that made this thing? They're clearly in pain, and it's some of the imagery is kind of contrasting and confusing, and I'm amazed that I did that much of it. It was a clear sign that I had a lot of processing to do, and I still do, as we all do. It's never going to be easy, but it ended up being one of the most fulfilling things I've done. Also, I have a hard time looking at it when I shows that other slide you saw, the stack of books there. That's all 5. There's whatever, hour 6. There's a lot of there to go through. And Jacob Bannon talks about he wants to publish it, and I can barely even, it's kind of like going back to read difficult old diary pages now.
Yeah.
But I'm also proud of it in a weird way too. I don't know quite what I'm going to do with it. I'm just kind of happy it's up on Instagram, and I still get occasional messages from people that say that they read the whole thing and they were like, "Oh, I get it now." The ending kind of, I tried to tie it up at the end. So it was a good thing, but it was a hard thing, and I don't really know if I'm going to publish it, but we'll see.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that.
Of course.
And a bit of a different vibe here, but just more examples of your work. I think every piece, there's something that ties it together to like the past piece, but you're like always trying something different. I think there's like a ongoing thread that I always love looking at your work. And it kind of, from like my point of view, it's kind of addicting looking at your work too, because when you find somebody who has like a unique, refined style and they just continue to explore it, there's a different experience to that instead of somebody who's just kind of like bouncing all over the place all the time. It's kind of aimless. So I've always liked that when I look at your work, like holistically.
I appreciate that. That feels very accurate. That I do love to experiment, and I'm always very keen to keep pushing forward, and I don't really like to get stuck in things too much. But also, I do recognize that, especially in the Instagram era, the more visual hooks you have, people can kind of be like, "Oh, I remember that. He's the guy that always does my characters often have like my like keys hanging off them." People love to pick on that. There's things that go through all of these images that they'll have at least one kind of signature me kind of.
So you learned something from Rob Liefeld with all the pockets, shit like that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Johnny Pockets. I'm the key guy for sure. Absolutely.
Well, I feel like in this period of time, you were doing the like really long, like shine streaks, from the Poscas.
Those are so. Once you put a ruler down and do that, and it goes over for some reason, it works so well as like a blinking kind of the shine. Like you said, like what's the word? You can really get out of control with it sometimes too. I've definitely gone a little bit too far. Even on this green guy over here, I feel like I went a little too hard on that, but it's too much fun to draw on top of your drawing for some reason. I don't know why. To like make them like to do the full drawing and then to be like, all right, I'm just gonna just keep going right on top and start carving away more on top of it. I don't know why I find it so pleasurable.
You could do splatter too. It's another.
Oh yeah, do you ever do the toothbrush thing? I do the toothbrush thing.
Oh yeah, do with like some like just dip it in gouache. What I did last time was I had like 4 different colored puddles, and I would get the brush through all of them at one time. It would just be like rainbow, just like shooting out. I'm
gonna try that. I just got a new toothbrush. The other one got so crowded up. I'm looking forward to try something new. And I also have. Do you use a lot of gouache? Is that your main painting now?
Highlights at the end. It's watercolor till basically as far as I can take it, and then I actually been dabbling back with colored pencil, which I love that medium too. I feel like it's very underrated.
I love colored pencil.
Yeah.
And very underrated. And you can do a lot. And I use colored pencil on top of these things too. It's a great just putting dry media on top. Looks good. Cool.
All right, and then I think we don't have to go long on any of these, but this was like older work with the digital, right?
Yeah, these are the, if your viewers want to look at these on my feed, you can zoom in and see they're all scanned screen tone. You can see even on the red one, you can see just how mechanical that screen tone back those dots are. You can see them kind of moire a little bit, but you can see the little dark parts and little weird things that I find so cool about them. I love using the digital ones when I can. These drawings were not even for anything. These were me mostly like trying to make the digital screen tones sing a little more.
Mm-hmm.
to see how much I'll use. I don't think Son of Man is going to have too many digital ones. I have plenty of old sheets. I'll try and use real screen tones on there, but in a pinch, I think these scanned ones looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I like this style. I think this stuff that you've been creating lately, though, you know how it is. You follow what is fun, but also what looks good. You know what I mean? So, like, and you correct me if I'm out of turn here. Me and you, we both work day jobs. We're probably in front of our computer like the whole time. So it's like, I don't want to create digital art because my entire life is like in front of that computer. So it's my escape. You know what I mean? So, and do you kind of feel similarly, like with really loving like the analog process of traditional media?
I've gone back and forth trying to make it work because I do know that it saves you a lot of time and money doing digitally. I know that it's obvious to everybody that that our way is like not the preferred mode of getting these ideas out anymore. The traditional stuff. I don't hate on people for that too, and I don't think it looks bad. The thing I don't know if I'm answering the right question right now, but I think that like the Control Z factor of do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, just be able to undo so easily.
All that undoing works against a lot of people, and it allows them to
you don't get the chance to recover like we were talking about earlier when you're like, oh shit, I made a mistake. How do I recover? And then you end up with a novel, unique idea.
Yeah, I feel I stay away from the computer partially because I don't really. I'm the exact same way. I have to work on my computer all day. I don't really want to, and especially when I have to. If you're also like me, when you're scanning your stuff in, it's like I don't want to scan this crap, but it's got to get on the internet. So what are you gonna do? The Control Z factor is working with a net, which is fine. It's not for everybody to be. A lot of people don't like the mess of regular real fine art, the clutter that goes along with it, the single-use plastics that go along with it. There's all kinds of reasons to not like it, but it's just not. It does not hit the same. And at first I tried to make it work for me by like, I would actually color things digitally, but I would color them. I would take my favorite blue Copic marker and just color a square on a piece of paper and scan that in, and then everything would cut off of that.
Uses like the color matcher.
Absolutely. No. I use it almost like you would use screen tone. I just cut away everything that I didn't want, or I would make it what's the word to make it see through so your lines can show line work and so through, but you
like
still
different
get
transparency to it.
Yes. So you can get the same kind of human feel from the markers. You see a little bit of that irregularity, but ultimately it still is pretty noticeable as digital, which is just the way it is. So I don't see a world where I don't use that. I think there's a cool way to do this stuff too. I haven't quite found what works for me. I don't quite know. There's people out there, I haven't seen everything, that are doing something cool with the same kind of thing. Using computers to replicate the real thing. But if you can Control Z everything, you're going to have a different what's the word?
Well, I mean, it changes how you think and approach something.
Yeah,
totally.
You don't have to commit to anything. Like when I do those lines, those white lines, I really have to, commit. And sometimes I don't. And I'm like, I sure wish I had planned this out better, because my line goes right over something I didn't want to. But that's just the way that's the risk I take. But it's not a whole lot of risk taking with the digital stuff.
Yeah.
So
I know
but
what
also
you mean.
a big part of it is just like I'm the same way as you. I like to be off the computer as much as possible.
I thought these were pretty cool, and they kind of fit in together. Are you just doing these for fun?
These are all just fun, yeah. These are I used to get these little sketch pads I forget what the brand is, Bien thing. Get them at the dollar store, and just make these little characters. It's a great way to learn figure work too. Just drawing these two guys fighting, like learning how the body twists and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So that's where I learned a lot. And I'm still pretty janky, but I kind of like how janky it is sometimes. Sometimes bad drawing is good. And the one on the right of the guys climbing the castle is one of my favorites. It's one I actually have hung up in my house. I was really proud with how that one turned out.
What do you like most about it? Like what does it for you?
I love that you can see what happened with those guys. You can see like the guy on the top is obviously getting clubbed. The guy on the bottom is getting speared, but you can see that the guy in the middle has been shot with arrows, but the other guy isn't shooting. You can see he just did. Something about that is like I capturing like a moment that I found that really worked well for me. And I actually think about this one a lot because it's like one of those things where it's like not all those guys would be doing that at the same time. It puts you in a weirder spot.
Yeah.
You know, when you pick your moment better. So that was a great learning experience.
Camera angle's nice too. And you got like the negative space in the top left corner. Like it's just really balanced too, composition wise.
Yeah. I've never been one to have like really like I know what balance. I've tried to teach myself how to balance a composition, and I've got a bunch of books, but it's not something I nail right away. But this one, I feel like I got it good that time.
Totally. I think this is the last slide. Just more stuff that's cool. I think I picked these because, well, they weren't robotic. You know, I was thinking, there's something that's a little different.
And that's something I would like to move into as well. More organic stuff, moving away. This Son of Man. I'm a never say never guy, but I after this one, I think I want to change something up and try it different, and get into more of a real world thing. These guys were really great learning experiences as well. That I could even do that. Sometimes when you're doing one style for months or sometimes even years at a time, you kind of lose knowledge of the fact that you don't always have to do that. Mm-hmm. You don't always have to be stuck being like the robot guy or the whatever person you're being pigeonholed as.
Right.
So I really like these guys, and I was like, oh, I can actually do something outside of that. It can still be very fantasy related, which is I've always loved sci-fi fantasy, but it's a completely different vibe, and it's a lot of different lines that I don't normally make. Curves. Yeah, but the pagan, the one on the left is this. Part me. It's me. The character's name is K-Man, and it's I'm a huge Conan fan, especially the comics, but the movies and all that.
Yeah, like stuff. Savage Sword, like those Savage 70s Sword. Ones with Buscema, right? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I have a friend who goes by Bausma as his last name, so like I always am like, oh, which one's which? Both are great artists, so yeah.
His is tough to pronounce, but Buscema and Barry Windsor Smith did incredible runs in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and those if you ever go to comic shops and dig around in their bins for their old 70s 80s magazines, they had a long run of Conan comic magazines with like anthology style. A lot of great stuff. I've always loved that. I love Conan. Conan is like is a great American archetype now. I think this Conan is like, it's been aped so many times by so many different people, by like Jack Kirby and just hundreds of times Conan has been recreated. Kamandi and Tor, and I wanted in on the action, and I thought it'd be really fun to like have like for some reason like a gator Conan, who was more of an alien. But the idea for that character was he was going to be a gator, but he never chomped down on people's heads. Something I'd have to think about it more. But I love K-Man. And then that Paganicus character, this guy, was going to be in Son of Man, but I went a different way. So he's just one of those concept pieces that is going to go nowhere. I thought he looked cool, kind of like a pagan god Bacchus type guy.
Well, I love the way you did the instrument. It kind of reminds me of Dr. Seuss a little bit.
Oh, cool! I love it too.
Which
it's the first time I drew someone playing a horn.
Nice. All right, man. Well, I'm super grateful for your time. We've definitely gone on quite a bit. One thing I'd like to wrap up, unless there's anything else you'd like to discuss, is just what's like a piece of advice you'd give to an artist who wants to operate in this scene. So let's be somewhat specific. Somebody who has always enjoyed comics. They don't want to go, assembly line style. They want to do it all by themselves. What would be like 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice you'd have for that person who just wants to take the plunge and create something, create a world?
Create a world. I think an important part of comics is that it does have a certain kind of a language. And I think that if you want to make comics, you should, I'm not saying you have to be like me and be a freak and buy a million copies of anything, but like become familiar with the form. There's lots of different ways to make them. They can look any different way. But if you want to tell a clear story, there's certain rules that I wouldn't be able to intimate them now. It's too big of a conversation. But after you read 100 comic books in a row at once. No, you read 100 comic books, you will begin to soak up those rules in a way. So my goal is to definitely make sure you read comics. The other suggestion would be like to don't just read comics, watch movies and look at art. That's my 2 main hobbies. Aside from chasing the cat, are I watch a ton of movies, all kinds. I'm on. Do you have the Tubi app? I'm on.
I don't, but I got like all the other streaming apps. Yeah,
I got it. Tubi's great. It's free. It's got commercials. The commercials melt your brain. It's fine. But they have a lot of weird stuff and B movies and things like that. Finding what you like, not just in comics language, will enrich your what you make. It will make it much more personal and weird. If you love comics, it's cool to love comics. I love them clearly, and I've read a lot. But I was really lucky to have my parents were both very curious, big readers, and also art lovers. So we weren't like living in a mansion or anything, but we just had a lot of art books in the house. They would go to the used bookstore or the library and bring them home, and they were just in stacks. And I, as a kid, didn't quite understand, but as an adult, as I grew into my tastes, I picked up that same habit of going to the used bookstore. I never buy expensive books. I go to flea markets, the used bookstore, the crummiest neighborhood comic shop I can find, or the library. And I think that filling up your head with what you love and what you like, and also what you don't like, is a big step in the right direction to help you narrow down what you want to do. Because a comic, if it's just you doing anything, if it's just you making the entire thing, it's a singular vision. There's no one else there to get in your way. So you should give yourself a narrower target area, and then just start honing in on what you like, and finding things and talking, and especially making friends. Making friends who are artists. Artists is an incredible step in the right direction for being an artist too. I've learned probably a little bit too late, but having friends that do the same thing will help that same kind of carving and honing, and you'll see the next step forward once you have those things in your mind. It's almost like you're building the bottom floor of it all that you're going to build on is that kind of thing. And I've been lucky that like I said, I grew up in a house that was full of that stuff. And if you haven't, you don't need to do exactly what I did, like all this shit here. You don't have to do that, but you can book by book flip through all of these at a bookstore, at a library, and it will stay in your head. It will be filed away. It will come out in an odd way years from now. You know, you'll be drawing something and be like, that kind of looks like that goddamn thing. It just, for some reason, it'll come out. And I think that's an important thing to make strange, fun art. It's an important thing to allow yourself to process everything you like and have it come out of your hands as a personal piece. But you know that it's the sum total of having flipped through all these pages coming out. It's distilled, but also it's very you, but you can see
where it came from,
what you like and where it came from. And you're going to like that feeling because it's going to make it, you're going to feel an attachment to your own art. And I think that's one thing I'd like people to know. I worry about comics people only reading comics. I think you should really just, or, artists who like a certain kind of art and only really like to look at that kind of art. And that's, I'm not saying that that's bad or not, but I think when you open yourself up to everything else, and especially knowing personally other people that do it, enriches everything.
Definitely. Well, really well said, Nick. And dude, so grateful for your time. It's really interesting talking about comics and sharing all your knowledge. And, you're in on the journey just like everybody else, too. I love your humility. It resonates, man. So for everybody, please follow Nick on social media. Read his blog. It's awesome. I was actually hooked. I think I spent like 30 minutes reading your blog. It's really well written. Cool. And of course, purchase FEND and then any other future comics that are going to be released. But thank you guys. Really appreciate it. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.